Before the names settle into the air, before honor becomes a burden and grief becomes a companion, there is only the desert at evening. The light is thin and amber. It rests lightly on the ridges of sand, on the dark cloth of tents, on the slow-necked camels waiting with the patience of creatures who know that human beings are often in a hurry and often mistaken. The wind moves without urgency. It carries the dry scent of earth, wool, leather, and smoke from a low fire. Somewhere beyond the visible horizon, a tribe is speaking in the language of custom. And custom is a kind of weather too. It shifts, it gathers, it breaks, and it leaves behind a silence that can last for years. This is the world of Al-Zir Salim, known in the Arabic literary tradition as Al-Muhalhil, the poet-warrior whose life was shaped by brotherhood, loss, and the long shadow of a feud that memory refused to let die. His story is not a single stone placed neatly on the ground. It is a path made by many footsteps and many retellings and many nights of speech beside a fire. It belongs to history, but also to the older and more delicate realm of oral remembrance, where facts are carried by the human voice and made luminous by longing. So let us begin slowly. Let the mind soften. Let the shoulders rest. Let the ancient desert open itself, not in violence, but in distance, in camel bells, in lowered voices, in the patient wait of time. In the beginning of the story, nothing yet appears inevitable. The tribes move across the Arabian steppe in a rhythm older than any written chronicle. Their camps are temporary, yet their customs are enduring. Their black tents, woven from goat hair, rise and fall with the seasons. Their lives are shaped by wells, grazing lands, and the steady arithmetic of survival. A place is not merely a place. It is a permission, a memory, a claim, a risk. At dawn, the camp wakes gradually. The first light does not arrive like a sudden announcement. It spreads. It touches the ropes of the tents, the backs of camels, the curved shoulders of earthen vessels. A woman kneels to milk an animal while a child watches in silence, absorbing the gestures of daily life as if they were lessons in how to belong to the world. Smoke rises in a thin vertical line from a small fire. A man wraps his cloak more tightly around his shoulders, because even in the desert, even in warmth, the morning can still carry a trace of cold. This is a society of movement, but not of disorder. Movement itself is governed by rules. There are routes remembered from one generation to the next, and wells whose names are spoken with caution, and alliances that must be maintained through hospitality, gift, and restraint. A guest must be fed. A stranger may be questioned. A dispute may be delayed. To delay is not always weakness. Sometimes it is the only thing that keeps a community from unraveling under the pressure of pride. The people of this world live close to the edge of scarcity, and so their emotions are often close to the surface. But even so, not every tension becomes a conflict. There is an art to surviving beside other tribes, an art built from glances, from measured speech, from the careful distribution of water, from the knowledge that the same horizon can be shared, but never taken for granted. Within this broad and unstable balance, the tribe of Taghlib is one of the great names of the northern Arabian memory, and among its leading figures rises Kulayb ibn Rabia, whose authority will later become central to the unfolding of the feud. Yet for now, before the wound, before the grief, the world still carries the fragile appearance of order. The camels browse in small groups. The women speak softly as they work. The men discuss pasture, weather, lineage. The children run, then pause, then listen. And above all of it, the desert remains patient. Kulayb is remembered in the tradition as a man of forceful presence, the kind of leader whose name seems to arrive before his footsteps do. In a tribal world, authority is not abstract. It is visible in the handling of animals, in the defense of pasture, in the tone of command, in the confidence with which a man speaks when others are listening. Power is not hidden in offices or distant laws. It stands in the open, near the tents, under the sky. Kulayb's authority is often linked to control over grazing lands. This detail matters because pasture is not merely grass. It is livelihood, mobility, and future milk. It is the difference between abundance and thinness, between a camp that can remain and a camp that must wander. To control pasture is to shape the life of others, and such control can be seen as protection or as domination depending on who is speaking and who is hungry. One can imagine Kulayb in the stillness of an early morning, his cloak drawn close, his gaze moving across the land with the habit of command. He would have understood the desert as a map of obligations. Where can the tribe graze? Who may approach the water? Which camp respects the boundary, and which camp tests it? In such a world, the leader is constantly reading the horizon as if it were a text. Yet authority in a tribal society carries a fragile edge. The stronger it appears, the more it invites resentment. Order can be admired and still feared. A leader who protects may also be the leader who does not bend. The line between guardianship and overreach is thin and often invisible until it has already been crossed. The tradition does not invite us to imagine Kulayb as a modern monarch, distant and bureaucratic. He is closer to the desert itself in temperament, severe, open, and difficult to soften. His pride becomes part of his legend. His insistence on control becomes the very thing that makes his name memorable. The story needs him to be strong, because only a strong figure can create a tragedy large enough to echo through generations. And somewhere in the background of this authority, the ordinary life of the camp continues. Children are still being instructed. Animals still need water. Women still grind grain. Men still sharpen knives, repair straps, and speak in low voices about what it means to be respected. The camp is calm, but not easy. It is a calm that depends on balance, and balance always asks for attention. The turning point begins, as so many old human tragedies do, with an object that is not, in itself, grand, a camel, a living creature, valuable and necessary, but not a kingdom, not a throne, not a city, a camel, and yet the weight of history gathers around it. In the tradition, the camel belongs to al-Basus, a woman whose name becomes inseparable from the early spark of the feud. The camel is harmed, and in that harm, the social world trembles. In a desert society, an animal is not simply property. It is milk for children, transport through difficult ground, a sign of wealth, a vessel of endurance. To damage such an animal is to touch the household's survival and dignity at once. One may imagine the moment not as a single dramatic blow, but as a troubling sequence. Perhaps there is an argument first, spoken in the flat and tense language of grievance. Perhaps a boundary has been crossed. Perhaps a grazing right has been disputed. Perhaps the camel, entering a place it should not have entered, has been taken as a provocation. In the oral tradition, these beginnings often remain deliberately compact, because their purpose is not only to record detail, but to show how easily order can fracture. The camp around al-Basus would have felt the change immediately. Women would have exchanged glances. Men would have gathered in a ring, their hands resting on staffs or at their belts. The air itself might seem to tighten. A child, not understanding the politics of the matter, might still sense the seriousness in the adult voices. The camel's presence, once ordinary, becomes symbolic. Its injury becomes a public statement, whether intended or not. And this is the deep truth of the incident. The event is small only in appearance. In a world of honor, even the smallest wound can become a mirror in which a tribe sees itself. Was the act an insult, a correction, a warning, a challenge? Such questions do not remain theoretical for long. They settle into the chest. They become memory. They become destiny. The desert, meanwhile, remains unchanged in its vastness. The sun continues its progress. Dust continues to rise. But among the people, the balance has shifted. Something delicate has been touched. Something that should have been resolved by compensation begins instead to gather the heat of humiliation. A camel's injury would, in a more settled society, be answered with a calculation, a payment, a repair, a negotiated settlement. But tribal life in the pre-Islamic world is governed by a more intimate and more dangerous logic. Honor is not a private emotion. It is a collective atmosphere. It surrounds the camp like the scent of smoke, and everyone breathes it in. When the grievance involving al-Basus begins to spread, it does not travel as a single sentence. It moves through voices. A woman speaks to a relative. A relative speaks to an elder. An elder weighs the meaning of the act. Another man hears of it and interprets it as a deliberate slight. Each retelling adds pressure. Each retelling carries not only facts, but feeling. Soon the event is larger than the object itself. There would have been long pauses in the conversations, men looking down, fingers tracing the grain of a staff, eyes moving toward the horizon, as if distance itself might offer a better answer than speech. The tribal world is full of such pauses, because speech here is never merely speech. It is an act that can repair or enlarge or harden. The role of al-Basus in the tradition is important precisely because she stands at the intersection of domestic life and political consequence. Her grievance is not a battlefield declaration. It emerges from the intimate sphere of camp, animal, and protection. And yet it becomes historical. This is one of the enduring features of the story. The great feud begins not with the clash of armies, but with the vulnerability of ordinary life. Around the camp, daily tasks continue with a new tension beneath them. Water is still carried, grain is still ground. Children still chase one another between tents. But the adults now listen more carefully. They speak a little less freely. Hospitality becomes more guarded because a guest can also be a messenger, and a messenger can also be a bearer of consequences. It is in such moments that history reveals its quietest and most dangerous habit. It does not always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it enters through a complaint, through a boundary, through the wounded dignity of a household. And once it enters, it asks to be remembered. The name Jassas ibn Murrah enters the tradition like a door opening into a darker room. He is associated with the killing of Kulayb, and with that act, the feud becomes irrevocable. Before this, there is still negotiation, still the possibility, however narrow, that speech might contain the damage. After this, the story enters the domain of blood debt, where time itself begins to taste different. We should imagine the atmosphere around such an event with care, not as spectacle, but as a sudden and devastating alteration of the air. A gathering that was tense becomes still. A conversation breaks. Someone moves too quickly. Someone else freezes. Dust rises from hurried feet and hooves. A horse stamps. A voice calls out in alarm. There is confusion, then recognition, and with recognition comes the full weight of consequence. In tribal memory, the killing of Kulayb does not function merely as a personal loss. It becomes the rupture that reorders a whole social universe. A leader has fallen, protection has failed, honor has been struck at its center. The line between rivalry and war dissolves. People begin to understand that life after this moment will be measured differently. And yet, from within the logic of the actors themselves, the act may not have seemed simple. Jassas is not best understood as a figure detached from social pressures. He is a man inside a kin network, inside expectations, inside a world where injury calls for response, and where silence can itself be shameful. The tradition does not ask us to excuse him. It asks us to understand that human beings in such systems often act under the dense pressure of inherited duty. The killing would have been followed by a particular kind of silence, the kind that is not peace but shock. People standing too still, women beginning to cry, men looking to one another for the next instruction, a messenger preparing to ride, a body being attended to, the desert, indifferent and immense, receiving the news without alteration, while human beings feel the world splitting around them. This is the moment when the story ceases to be about grievance alone. It becomes about memory, and memory, once bound to blood, is hard to loosen. The death of Kulayb leaves behind not only a political absence, but an emotional architecture of ruin. The house of brothers has been altered. One pillar has fallen, and the other must now carry what remains. That surviving brother is Al-Muhalhil, or Abu Layla, the figure who will become the central voice of grief and revenge. Mourning in the tribal world is not a private luxury. It is public, vocal, and communal. Women lament. Men lower their gaze. The dead are named again and again because to speak the name is to keep the person from disappearing too quickly into the vastness of loss. The camp itself seems to slow. Even routine gestures take on a solemn weight. Water is poured more carefully. Bread is broken with less appetite. The sound of a camel's rope against a tent pole can seem strangely loud. For Al-Muhalhil, grief is not a single moment but an ongoing condition. He is not simply sad. He is reorganized by sorrow. The tradition presents him as a poet, and this is crucial. Poetry gives form to feeling, but it also prolongs it. A sorrow that can be recited becomes a sorrow that can be carried. The line of verse holds the wound in language so that it does not close too quickly. One can imagine him sitting apart from others in the hours after the death, perhaps with his cloak drawn around him, perhaps looking at nothing in particular, perhaps hearing the voices around him as if from a distance. The mind in grief often moves in circles. It returns to the same image, the same absence, the same impossible fact. The brother is gone, and the world continues anyway. This is one of the hardest truths in the story. The sun rises. The animals still need tending. The camp still requires decisions. But the inner life of the bereaved does not move on at the same pace as the outer world. Al-Muhalhil must live inside a contradiction. He is required to continue, and yet continuation itself feels like betrayal unless it is joined to memory. Thus begins the transformation. Grief becomes duty. Duty becomes motion. Motion becomes the road by which the dead brother is carried into the future. In some lives, a name is only a label. In others, it becomes a burden, a banner, a task. For Al-Muhalhil, brotherhood is not merely kinship. It is obligation sharpened into identity. He is no longer simply a man among men. He is the surviving brother of Kulayb. And this means that every choice now reflects upon the dead. The poet in a pre-Islamic setting is not a decorative figure. He is memory's custodian, reputation's amplifier, and sometimes the only archive a people possess. Words travel farther than bodies. A verse can move from camp to camp, from tribe to tribe, carrying praise, insult, lament, and warning. Al-Muhalhil's poetry becomes part of the feud's machinery, but it also reveals his inner life. He speaks because he cannot contain the pressure of remembrance. The emotional experience of such a man is likely to be restless. He may sleep lightly, if at all. He may listen for news before dawn. He may watch the faces of messengers with an intensity that others find difficult to bear. When he eats, he may be distracted. When he rides, he may ride as if being pulled by a thread tied to the past. Grief has a way of inhabiting the body. It changes posture, breath, tempo. The desert around him offers no easy consolation. It is too large for that. Yet it also provides a kind of existential clarity. Under the open sky, there is nowhere to hide from memory. The horizon does not distract. It reflects. It stretches the mind outward while keeping the heart fixed on what is absent. In the oral tradition, Al-Muhalhil's words are remembered because they are both sharp and tender. He is not a simple engine of vengeance. He is a man who has been cut by loss and who now speaks from within that cut. His poetry keeps the dead brother socially alive. it also keeps the feud alive, which is the tragic cost of memory when it is joined to honor. One hears, in imagination, the low murmur of a recited line at night, the rustle of cloth, the crackle of a small fire, the breath of camels nearby, and the stillness of people listening to a sorrow that has become history. The feud now lengthens into a road with no easy end. Raids and counter-raids become the part of the landscape of life. The men ride out at intervals, returning with reports, losses, and the occasional grim satisfaction that the logic of honor demands. But satisfaction is a poor word for what such people likely feel. More often, there is only temporary relief, followed by renewed tension. The desert in this phase is both setting and participant. It offers concealment, distance, and exposure all at once. A rider can disappear behind a rise. A caravan can be seen from far away. A water source can become contested ground. The same land that sustains movement also makes movement dangerous. Daily life during the feud would have been shaped by vigilance. Tents are pitched with a little more caution. Horses are kept ready. Children are told not to wander far. Women listen for the return of riders. Men scan the horizon and estimate what a cloud of dust may mean. Every sound acquires a possible interpretation. Every silence becomes suspicious. There is a particular sadness in the routines of a war that does not end quickly. People learn to live around the conflict. They cook, mend, milk, and tend while carrying fear as if it were another vessel to be lifted and set down. The war becomes part of the calendar, part of the weather of the soul. And because the conflict is tribal, it is never only about the individual men who fight. It touches marriages, alliances, trade, grazing, reputation, and the education of children. A young boy grows up hearing the names of the dead before he knows how to fully understand them. A girl learns the sound of lament. Elders repeat the story until the story itself becomes a social inheritance. Al-Muhalhil moves through this world as a man driven by obligation and weariness. He is not outside the war, he is inside it, and the war is inside him. The road of retaliation is not straight. It loops through alliances, failures, and renewed vows. It stretches the human spirit thin. Still, the camp rises each morning. Still, milk is poured. Still, the fire is lit. Still, the desert wind brushes the tent cloth with a sound almost like breathing. To understand the emotional atmosphere of the War of al-Basus, one must listen not only to the men who ride, but also to the women who remember. In tribal societies, women's lamentation is not a minor detail. It is part of how grief is made visible, and how the dead remain socially present. When a man falls, the women of his kin may gather to mourn, in voices that rise and fall like wind through a narrow pass. The sound is not ornamental. It is a cultural expression of loss, and a moral pressure as well. It says, this death matters. This absence matters. The community must not forget. Al-Basus herself stands within this broader pattern of female presence in the tradition. Her grievance begins the chain of events, but her significance extends beyond the initial spark. She represents the vulnerability of domestic honor in a world where a woman's suffering can become a tribal cause. Her position reminds us that history is often carried by those who do not wield formal power, but who nonetheless alter the course of events. In the camp, women would have been responsible for much of what keeps life from unraveling, preparing food, tending children, maintaining tents, preserving water, and sustaining the emotional climate of the household. They also preserve memory. A lament can outlive a battle. A name repeated in sorrow can travel farther than the rider who first carried the news. In this sense, women are custodians of the dead, and the dead depend on them for continued presence. The psychological atmosphere around such mourning is slow and layered. Grief is not one note. It is fatigue, disbelief, tenderness, bitterness, pride, and exhaustion. It may come in waves. It may arrive at night when the camp is quiet. It may surface in the middle of a task, when a familiar gesture suddenly recalls the absent one. In such moments, the world does not collapse. It simply becomes heavier. And the poet hears all of this. He turns it into line and cadence. He carries it forward. He makes memory audible. The feud cannot be understood apart from the material life of the desert. Honor is not floating in abstraction. It is tied to livestock, pasture, water, and survival. Scarcity gives moral force to every decision. A single animal may matter greatly. A well can become a point of destiny. A grazing right can determine whether a tribe thrives or weakens. This is why the incident involving a camel is so historically resonant. In a plentiful world, the matter might have remained local. In a world of scarcity, it becomes symbolic of everything that sustains life. A camel is not only wealth, it is continuity. It is milk for the young, transport for the old, and a reserve of endurance in a difficult land. To injure such an animal is to disturb the practical and emotional economy of the camp. The desert economy is also an economy of reputation. A tribe known to protect its rights may deter challenge. A tribe seen as weak may invite encroachment. Thus, honor and survival are entangled. This entanglement creates a world in which retaliation can seem necessary, even when it is tragic. One can imagine the men discussing these matters in low voices beside the fire. Their speech would not be theatrical. It would be measured, often repetitive, full of reminders and hesitations. What was taken? Who was present? What was said? What is owed? These are not merely legal questions. They are questions of face, lineage, and future standing. Meanwhile, the ordinary sensory world remains rich in detail. The smell of milk warming near the fire, the dusty texture of a worn cloak, the creak of leather straps, the distant call of a bird over open land. Such details matter because they remind us that even in a feud, life is composed mostly of small and repeated actions. And this is perhaps the deepest sorrow of the story. The people do not live only for war. They live for food, for children, for shade, for sleep, for conversation, for the comfort of a familiar animal. Yet the feud enters these ordinary spaces and makes them less secure. A feud that lasts for years changes from event into atmosphere. At first, the people remember the initiating cause clearly. Later, they remember only the weight of the repetition. The original wound remains, but it is now surrounded by layers of fatigue, inherited obligation, and the slow erosion of possibility. In the War of al-Basus, the passage of time itself becomes part of the tragedy. Younger men grow into the conflict. Older men become tired of speaking the old names, yet cannot release them. Horses age, camels age, camps shift, the desert seasons turn, rain comes and goes, but the feud remains, as if rooted beneath the surface of all that changes. Al-Muhalhil, carrying the memory of his brother, must endure this extended duration. This is perhaps the most psychologically demanding aspect of the tale. Revenge is often imagined as a single act, but here it becomes a life structure. The avenger is required not only to act, but to continue wanting to act across long stretches of time. The mind must remain attached to the wound. The heart must keep its direction. And yet such persistence is not simple strength. It is also captivity. The man who cannot cease remembering is not entirely free, even if he appears formidable. The tradition's greatness lies partly in this recognition. Heroism is mixed with suffering. Loyalty is mixed with exhaustion. The same force that preserves honor also denies rest. Around him, the camp adapts to the long emergency. People become more skilled at routine under pressure. They know how to pack quickly, how to guard the animals, how to listen at night. Children learn caution by imitation. Women learn where to place things so they can be moved without delay. The whole social body becomes more alert, but also more tired. The desert wind moves through all of this without judgment. It shakes the tent cloth. It softens footprints. It erases traces. Human beings, however, do not erase so easily. They remember in the body, in the voice, in the naming of sons and brothers. There is a quiet sadness in imagining Al-Muhalhil not only as a legendary avenger, but as a human being with daily breath, daily hunger, daily fatigue. What does a man become when grief is stretched across years? He becomes attentive in a different way. He becomes suspicious of ease. He may find stillness difficult. He may carry a constant readiness inside him, as though the world might ask again for sacrifice. His inner life is likely filled with recurrence. The dead brother appears not as a memory safely stored, but as a presence that returns without invitation. A gesture reminds him. A phrase reminds him. A landscape feature reminds him. Even the simple act of sitting beside a fire may become a doorway into recollection. This is the burden of the bereaved in an honor culture. The dead are not only mourned, they are obligations. The poetry attributed to him in the tradition gives us a glimpse into this inward state. His voice does not float above the world. It is embedded in it. The verses carry the heat of the desert, the sharpness of loyalty, the ache of unfinished duty. They are not merely literary ornaments. They are emotional records. One can imagine him at night, the camp quieting around him, the fire shrinking into embers. The air cools, the stars become more visible. Somewhere nearby, a camel shifts its weight and exhales. The sound is low, almost like a sigh. In that moment, he may feel the nearness of the dead more intensely than in daylight. Night often makes memory more intimate, and yet, even in this intimacy, there is no easy release. The brother cannot return. The feud cannot restore him. The avenger can only continue to live in relation to the absence. This is why the story remains so haunting. Its hero does not conquer grief. He inhabits it. When the immediate actors are gone, the feud does not vanish. It changes form. It enters poetry, recitation, and the long afterlife of cultural memory. This is where the story of Al-Muhalhil becomes larger than the historical moment that produced it. He is no longer only a man in a tribal conflict. He becomes a figure through whom later generations think about grief, honor, and the cost of inheritance. The Arabic literary tradition preserves such figures not because they were simple, but because they were complete enough to carry meaning. Al-Muhalhil embodies several contradictions at once. He is loyal, yet trapped, poetic, yet hard, grieving, yet active, human, yet legendary. This layered identity is what allows him to endure in the imagination. The story becomes a vessel for reflection on how societies remember. It asks, What do we owe the dead? How long should memory remain sharp? When does honor protect dignity? And when does it begin to consume the living? The afterlife of the Feud also reveals something about the function of oral history. A story repeated in gatherings is not just entertainment, it is a form of cultural instruction. It teaches the costs of pride. It preserves the emotional atmosphere of an older world. It gives shape to a past that might otherwise dissolve into abstraction. In this sense, Al-Muhalhil is not only remembered, he is retold. And in the retelling, the rhythm of his life becomes a lesson in the fragility of peace. A camel is harmed, a killing follows, a brother grieves, a tribe is consumed by years of obligation. The pattern is simple to say, but difficult to live. The desert itself seems almost to approve of such restraint in storytelling. It does not rush. It does not explain too much. It leaves space between the dunes, space between the lines, space for the listener to breathe. Now the fire has grown smaller. The voices have softened. The camels lie quiet in the dark, their forms only partly visible in the low light. The tents are still. The ropes give a faint, occasional whisper in the wind. Above, the sky is open and deep, filled with the patient arrangement of stars. The desert, so often a place of movement and tension, becomes at this hour something nearly tender. The story of Al-Zir Salim does not end with triumph. It ends the way many old human stories end, with memory continuing after action has exhausted itself. The feud belongs to history, but the feeling it produced belongs to the human condition. Brotherhood, loss, duty, pride, the inability to return to what was once simple. These are not ancient alone. They are familiar in every age. Al-Muhalhil remains in the tradition, a man shaped by what he could not unmake. He is the poet of a wound that became a road. He is the voice that carried grief forward until it became literature. And because literature can preserve sorrow without making noise, his name has continued to travel gently through time. So let the desert grow quieter now. Let the wind pass softly over the tents. Let the camels settle into sleep. Let the old names rest for a while in the warm darkness of remembrance. Let the mind, too, become still. There is no need to hurry beyond the horizon. No need to gather the threads too tightly. History has spoken in a low voice, and now it may fade.